This video is about using your calculator for trigonometry functions, and you should see your keys for sine, cosine, and tangent. They will be abbreviated with their three-letter abbreviations. Remember, these are functions, so there's going to be numbers that are going to be input into the function. For example, sine of 30, and we read that the sine of 30 degrees. 30 in this case is the argument of the function. That's the number we're putting into the function. Now, in order to evaluate this or find the answer to the sine of 30, you need to know if your calculator expects to get the 30 before or after you put in the sine function. And it's just different on different calculators. So you're going to need to do a test to see which way it works on your calculator. In order to try this, put in one of these sets of keystrokes. You're either going to put 30 followed by sine or sine followed by 30, and you probably need equals. Try that on your calculator, and that should tell you which way you need to do it. Now, the correct answer is 0.5, so make sure that you are getting this correctly on your calculator, that the sine of 30 degrees is 0.5. Now, if you got some very odd numbers, it's possible your calculator is not in degree mode, because angles could be measured in degrees, but they can also be measured in radians or gradients. This is important, that if your calculator seems really off, make sure you set the mode to degrees. And in this video, we'll be expecting you to be using degrees. And again, make sure you're getting that the sine of 30 equals 0.5. If you are, then you know your calculator is in degree mode. All right, we're going to go ahead and try these. You're going to find the sine of 37 degrees. On your calculator, you should be getting a long number, something like 0.601815, and it goes on and on and on. Since we want to go to 3 decimal places, our answer is going to be to 3 decimal places. You need to look at the next number. And if that's 5 or more, then you know you're going to need to go up. So our answer here is 0.602. And of course, you could leave off the leading 0. That answer is just as good. Now try the sine of 7 degrees, and again round that to 3 decimal places. See if you're getting the same thing that I'm getting when I do the sine of 7 degrees. I have 0.12, and I need to round that up to a 2. Here's our next problem, tan of 81 degrees, and here you should be getting a long number, something like 6.31375. But right there, you need to look at the number right after the 3 decimal places. That is 5 or more, so I'm getting 6.314 for the tan of 81 degrees. Cosine of 50, try that in your calculator. Again, round to 3 decimal places here, and you should be coming up with 0.643. Here's one more, the cosine of 12. When you look at your calculator, take the cosine of 12, and you will get a lot of figures here, and we're going to round that to the nearest 3 places. In this case, this 1 is not 5 or more, it's smaller than 5, which means we're going to leave the 8 as an 8 and get 0.978. That'll be the answer for the cosine of 12. I say it's the answer rounded to 3 decimal places in all of these cases. Here, they're telling us that when they take the sine of an angle, they get 0.5. And we're asked, well, what is that angle? Now, if you remember earlier, actually, we did happen to use this example. The sine of 30 degrees is equal to 0.5. So do you see that the angle is 30 degrees? But we just happen to know that. We need to be able to figure it out if we didn't know it. So when we started with 30 degrees before, and we took the sine of 30 degrees, that sine of 30 degrees resulted in the 0.5, or 0.5, but essentially 0.5. Now we want to start with 0.5 because that's what they gave us here, and find our way back to 30 degrees. In order to do that, we need to use something called inverse sine. This is also called arc sine. These mean exactly the same thing. In some calculators, there's actually a key called arcsine, but more likely, you're going to have a key that looks like this with a little -1 on it. And here, in order to get from the 0.5 back to the 30, we're going to use the inverse sign of 0.5, and that will lead us to 30. You can go ahead and try that. In other words, to solve this problem, this angle is going to be equal to the inverse sign of 0.5, and if you try that on your calculator, you should come to 30. And let's see, if you're not sure how to do that on your calculator, let's take a look at this. The inverse functions are used to find the angles. Here's what they look like. Possibly on your calculator it might say arcsine, arccosine, and arctan. Those are alternate ways to specify the exact same function. These are probably right above your sine, cosine, and tangent keys. To access the ones that are up above these functions on top, you need to use second or shift to get to that function on top. And just to make sure you're doing this correctly, double check that you're able to get the inverse sign of 0.5 and end up with 30. Here we're told that the sine of A is 0.93 or 93 hundredths. We want to find angle A, so we're going to say A is equal to the inverse sine of 0.93, and you're going to go ahead and do that in your calculator. And rounding to the nearest tenth, you should come up with 68.4. Here's another case. They tell us the tangent of B is 3.6. We want to find the angle, so B is going to be the inverse tan of 3.6. Go ahead and try that on your calculator, and to the nearest tenth, let's talk about for a minute what you're going to see on your calculator, something like 74.4758, but we're just going to the nearest tenth. If you look at the next number, that's going to say, oh, go up 1 because that 7 is 5 or more, so it'd be 74.5. That's to the nearest tenth. All right, try this one. The inverse cosine of 0.75, rounding to the nearest tenth. So on your calculator, you should be seeing 41.40, and there's more, but really you're rounding to the nearest tenth. You need to look at the next digit. That's certainly not more than 5, so we're just going to get 41.4. Let's try the next one. The inverse cosine of 0.5. This one comes out nice and even. Actually, it's a whole number. That's 60, or 60 degrees. The inverse tan of 8. In this case, when you put this in your calculator, you should be seeing 82.8749. It goes on and on and on. We're rounding to the nearest tenth. We look at the next number. That is more than 5, so we're going to write this as 82.9. Okay, sine of 60. Now we want to round to the nearest hundredth. So when you look at that, you should be seeing 0.86602 and some more numbers there. So the nearest hundredth is right here. You take a look at that 6, and that's going to round this to 0.87. Try the cosine of 60, and this is going to come out nice and even. This will come out to, you'll see 0.5. Of course, you could also just write 0.5. Notice, by the way, we've gone back to simply taking the sine and taking the cosine. Now we have the inverse sine. So when we do the inverse sine of 0.251 and we're rounding to the nearest hundredth, on your calculator you should be seeing 14.53669. Again, we're going to the nearest hundredth here. So here's hundredths place. I just need to go one more. Oh, again, more than 5. So this will round to 14.54. Now for the inverse tangent of 2.4, go ahead and put that in your calculator. Again, in your calculator you see many digits. You want to round to the nearest hundredth. Here's the hundredths place, so it's 2 places. And you look at the digit after it, which is actually a 0, so this is simply going to be 67.38. And that concludes our video on using your calculator for trig functions.